Welcome to the Waves Business Coaching Podcast, where you can equip yourself with the tools and insights to build the dream team your business needs so that you can lead with confidence, master your people challenges, and reclaim your freedom. I'm your host, Jacob Karnes, a business coach and author of Master Your First Job. This week on the podcast, I interview my new friend, Jake, and we talk about employee engagement and employee training and how to make your training more engaging, what makes a training bad, and what to avoid. We just have a great conversation about communication and training and how to make your employee training more effective in your business. It's a phenomenal conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it and meet Jake. I wrote a book last year called Master Your First Job to help first-time employees thrive in their roles and to help business owners better understand and develop young talent. If you'd like a free copy of that book, you can go to masteryourfirstjob.com/free. That's masteryourfirstjob.com/free and get a free e-copy of my book, Master Your First Job. Let's dive into my conversation with my friend Jake. Jake, thanks so much for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Man, I'd love for you to take the next 5 minutes or so, share your story with us.
Sure. Well, besides having a great name, just to start,
that's right.
Really happy to be here. My name's Jake, and I have, I'm going to do a little bit of a Tarantino here. I'm going to tell you sort of where I'm at now, and I'll give you a little bit of the details of how I got here.
A film guy. Okay.
Yes, I am. Don't get me started on film processes and how I pick my movies. That could be like an After Dark
episode. It's a bonus. That's yes. Right.
So I run a company called Intention Craft. That sounds grand. It's just me. I'm solopreneur. But just so we're clear, so I run Intention Craft, and I'm all about helping coaches go from one-to-one to group coaching model, specifically focusing on how to structure and deliver your group coaching experience. And the way I got here is kind of interesting because I started my what we'll call it my college, started in college with mechanical engineering. Seems pretty far away from what I'm now calling experience design. But there's a thread here, and I'll connect the dots in a moment. But I started mechanical engineering, then went to sales in my first corporate job. And I actually only had one corporate employer. So I had a few internships. Besides that, I've only worked for one company before I started doing my own thing. And I had a number of roles. First was sales. And then we can, if you want to pull this thread, even though it's maybe not relevant so much to what we're here for, but I did a round the world trip that I quit my job for, took effectively a year-long sabbatical that didn't have a guarantee of coming back to my employer, by the way, but quit my job, came back, tried to find some jobs, ended up back at the same company I was working for in a different role, which was ostensibly marketing, which I find interesting now in this entrepreneurial journey. It was not marketing the way I think of marketing at all. It was like the product management team, right?
Got it. Yep.
Yeah. So product management, which effectively turned into sort of entrepreneurship, if you will. So kind of running a mini startup almost within the company. We built a small software team, and I was kind of like leading it. So I was in charge of a lot of things. The actual development of the program for like our product, the project management, the product management, the product owner role, the scrum master role for a while. If you know anything about software, these are like, probably shouldn't be the same thing necessarily, but it was a small team. We were figuring it out, right? So anyway, that led me to discovering design thinking, which is the most recent part and very relevant to what I do now in my entrepreneur journey, which if you're not familiar with design thinking, it's a discipline. It's like a mindset, it's a discipline and a set of tools that typically capital D designers use that are now applied to other areas of like the work environment or even personal life. So the quintessential like design thinking, the mindset piece is human centric. So you're thinking about the humans on the other end. You're thinking about who's using your product is kind of the quintessential like designer aspect. But if you're HR, let's say, you may be thinking about we're rolling out a new policy. How is that going to affect our users, which is our internal customers, which is different than a lot of people might approach it. They might just think, well, we need to do this for compliance. So let's just roll this thing out. Design thinking would say, well, let's think about the people using it. Let's go interview them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's some of the mindset piece. And then the quintessential tool is a sticky note with like the exercises and the methods or whatever you want to call them. And that's like the tool side, the process side of design thinking. There's lots of structured exercises that I have at my disposal to use for what used to be workshops and now helping people build group programs. So coming into contact with design thinking in my product role led me eventually to the design thinking team at Eaton. Took a few years to get there, but I kept at it and finally got on that team. And that's where we were basically trying to build organizational capability of this skill set of design thinking within my company. And we're a relatively small team. We were 4 people for we'll call it round up 100,000 person company. It's a big company. And so our job was not to do everything for people, but to teach them to do it. So I led a bunch of trainings, usually virtual, not always. A bunch of trainings. We designed those trainings. We designed and delivered our own workshops as well, often to help teach people to do that better, as a way of like showing by doing, or teaching by doing, if you will. And then we built some resources and also did one-on-one coaching. So that's kind of brings me back to today. The thread that ties us all together for me personally was always process. So that's kind of the engineering side, showing through the sales side. I like the process of like, how do you do this in a systematized fashion rather than just like flailing, which I kind of started with doing, then learned to process, and all the way through to design thinking, and today helping people with what they're doing now. So anyway, that's kind of a snapshot.
I love it. We could probably record a few bonus episodes on Agile, which is something I
don't get me started.
Chick-fil-A training. I do have a quick question. I worked as a full-time trainer with Chick-fil-A Inc. Do you have like a training or facilitation, Jake, that you put on like a stage presence and then you take off when you get off the stage?
I think maybe a little bit, but maybe sometimes to my detriment, not enough, maybe. Okay. So, and we can pull these threads, but I think that's part of what made me, what I hear is a engaging trainer, is that I wasn't just corporate. I kind of like pressed against the corporate bounds of what I probably should do.
Yeah.
My favorite example was always, let me guess, you want to add shareholder value. You know what? I don't care about shareholder value. And people are like, what are you talking about? You can't say that. I'm like, but let me explain why. It's because if you actually care about your customer, then the shareholders will benefit. So let's focus on the customer, and the shareholder will get what they need, et cetera, et cetera. So I usually brought it back, but I like to bring a little bit of heat sometimes, if you will.
There you go. No, I love that. I think it shows authenticity too, right? Like it's like, hey, I'm being real. I'm not just here toting the corporate flag and waving it with pride, and which I think, again, if the goal is action on the end of it, that's a lot more beneficial.
Yes.
But before we dive more into kind of this training and engagement and coaching, which I can't wait to talk about, I'd love to know, I read a book last year called Master Your First Job. What was your first job?
So I'll keep this short, but I have two sort of answers. The first thing I made money at, well, actually I could go even deeper, but I'll kind of keep it relevant here. I sold drinks at the University of Florida football games where I went to school from sometime in early high school. So I'd carry those big trays around yelling for drinks. It got to the point, by the way, just really funny, they called me the quarterback because I would always ask, do you want your quarters back? And there was a section in particular that's like, hey, quarterback, give me a drink. And they would heckle people if they said, yeah, give me my quarters back. I'm like this college kid just asking if I can have your change, basically. And they're like heckling on my behalf, which was kind of cool. But the more serious answer maybe to your question is there's a childcare company in Gainesville where University of Florida is. And that's where I really learned how to, work within more of they weren't really corporate, but more of a structure rather than just like my own thing.
Right.
And when I became a supervisor, I was introduced to things like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it really kindled that desire of personal growth and self-help almost, which almost has a bad flavor to it in some people's minds, I think. But like that kind of aspect, I really, really got involved with and started to love. So anyway, I could talk more about all that stuff as well, but that's the answer to your question.
Dude, Stephen Covey, he's on I have like a little shelf of fame over here of books that have changed my life, or, best books I've ever read. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, forever on the shelf.
Yes, agree.
Top shelf book. So I want to start with a big question I know a lot of business owners are facing that's going to be really, really relevant to what you do and what they're dealing with, is like employee engagement, right? Like, and you talked about, look, in marketing, your customer is external, right? It's the person actually buying their products or goods. But even with the HR example you talked about, like, you do have an internal customer. And when this idea of training, like, you have an internal customer and it's your employee. How can business owners drive engagement with employee training? It's so tough.
It is tough. And I have kind of a hot take on this. So I'll kind of put my spicy hat on, or it's just my hat, like I said before, is you can't lead you can lead a horse to water, but you can't get him to drink. And that's kind of the mindset I have. So then and I also thought of this the other day. It's similar to raising kids. I have 2 young kids. Okay. Like I can try to get them excited. I can try to tell them to do stuff, but if they don't care, they just don't care.
That's right.
I think to a certain degree, employees are similar. Now, let's maybe differentiate 2 different things. So if you're talking training, you're talking compliance training. Sometimes people just have to do stuff for compliance reasons or whatever, right? So that aside, if it's more of what I'll call an optional or a growth training, or you're trying to take someone through a transformation to upskill them or whatever, I think the key there is really finding a way to effectively sell them or market them. Again, with our now entrepreneurial hats on, it's like the best way to sell is not by actually convincing someone. It's by just showing them that this is what they want and it will get them something that they need or whatever. People have probably said it better than that. But how does this training actually impact their work, their life, their enjoyment of work? And a lot of times, there is fun to be had and self-fulfillment. It's almost like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs that helps people feel more fulfilled. And if you can paint that picture for them in a real way, maybe it's through testimonials and other stuff, and just having ways for people to connect with why they want it will get them there. Now, the other piece I will say real quick is if you are forcing people to take a training that is optional, I would not recommend that. So I actually got to the point in my previous role where teams would come to me and say, hey, we've heard design thinking is great, or so-and-so leader told us we should go take our team to do this, whatever. Good intent. And we love it was all basically grassroots by the time I joined the team. We weren't really effectively marketing. It was kind of just people coming to us. And I would say, well, I hear you, but let's do this. Let's pitch it to your team. I have some materials for you. You can explain what it is and why. And let's let them opt in, because we found time and time again, if you're forcing people to come, they may be sort of engaged, but I know most of those people, especially if they didn't want to be there, they never touched the stuff when they left. So then what's the point of training? You're wasting resources all around. So I like to have people opt in. And then what usually happens is some of those people the same people's team who were maybe hesitant at first, they hear about the great stuff. They see some of the things they're doing, and then they get interested because some of their coworkers are interested. And that helps drive more of that grassroots interest rather than trying to just force people. So I don't know if that helps, but I don't know if there is a good answer to how do you basically drive engagement, if you will.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned opting in. So let's say, a business owner is like, I tried it. I had people opt in for this optional training. I have a team of 100 and 4 people opted in. So I'm not trying it again. Like, what would your response be to that?
Well, then I like going back to, like, why do you even want people to do this training? So sometimes I think the question being asked is maybe the wrong question. So a lot of times, again, I only have one company that I've ever worked for. So I only have an N of one, but I assume many corporations have corporate training goals and other stuff. And that drives some of the desire to get training done. Well, we need to get our teams trained for this. This is what people tell us we need to do. But if you're not connecting with the why, like the deeper business why or the deeper team why or whatever, I think that's where people can sort of forget and lose their way. And then they wonder why things aren't working. But I would say it probably doesn't matter anyway, if it's not actually connected to what you actually need to do. Now, let's assume that it is something that they should be doing or that would benefit them. I think it's a problem of not connecting with like a problem that they actually have that they need to solve. So again, back to this entrepreneurial kind of mindset of how do you sell stuff? You're not finding a need that is strong enough within either that leadership's mind to pitch it to their teams, or the people under his or her, purview or whatever on their team. They're not finding enough reason, enough pain that this problem would solve. And so we need to find a better way to frame it. So that's kind of what I would say to that, which may be a little wishy-washy, but we can go deeper if you want.
It's interesting. The more you talk about, have you read Building a Story Brand? Are you familiar with the framework at all?
I've read Story Brand. Yeah.
So today is actually the launch day of Building a Story, as we're recording, Building a Story Brand 2.0, which is really excited for. Got my hands on an early copy. And
nice.
I mean, the more you talk, this is why I tell people that something like Story Brand, or even just focusing on like, hey, what problems are your customers dealing with and how are you solving it? Like that one thing. And then I tell them, they're like, oh, I don't work in marketing. I'm like, okay, you're sending an email to your team and you're wanting them to do something. Ask the same question and just watch the response. like every bit of messaging to me is marketing, whether it's internal or external. And so I like this focus on, hey, how are we solving a problem for our end user, which in this case is our team, right? It's employees.
Yes.
So we've talked about driving engagement being very tough. Are there common pitfalls you see that businesses do that hurt engagement on the opposite side, that you're like, okay, but I can't give you a golden ticket here, but for sure avoid this. Don't do this.
Yeah. So besides the opposites of the things we just talked about, which is obvious, another thing that we haven't talked about is a lot of time, it depends on the scope of training. So a lot of the trainings I did were 4-day, 3-hour each day virtual trainings. So not a huge disruption, but a pretty big disruption. There are many trainings that are just days long and a block of time, or even other things that I've done, which are multi-day workshops. And the problem you run into is the people are sitting there in their training or in their workshop or whatever it is. And they're thinking, wow, okay, I'm glad I'm here because this stuff is interesting. And now I'm getting pinged on my phone or whatever, my email, if their laptops are open, which hopefully they're not, but they're getting distracted by all these things coming in. And what I wish more leaders would do is find a way to protect them and or almost view it as rewarding them. Hey, I want you to take this training. Here's why. Maybe we're connected on that and you're good. But hey, boss, what about all these things that aren't stopping that I'm gone? Oh, is there a way we can get someone to help with that? Is there a way we can clear the deck somehow? Is there a way to protect their time and really focus them on that training? Because like, I'm sure, I mean, like Cal Newport talks about this stuff all the time, but if you're like distracted and you're not really focused, you're not doing the deep work of training, because that is deep work to really learn and transform, right? And like, what's the point of doing this in the first place? So if you can't find a way to help protect your teams, because we all go on vacations, I hope everybody out there is going on vacation. You should. We're all going on vacation. So there are periods of time where this works. So make that work for something like a training where you need a dedicated chunk of time.
Yeah, that's huge. So you kind of started hinting at this, but when I think about training, obviously you and I booked Worth in training, and I can think about what sessions worked for me. And on the other side too, as a user, I know what sessions didn't work. And I can try to pinpoint why that is. But what do you think truly sets a great training experience apart? Like, what makes it, use the word transformational, right? Like, we want people to take action. How can someone take something that maybe it is even compliant, right? Where it's like, hey, they have to learn this, but I need them to transform, right? Like, they have to learn this process or whatever it is.
Yep.
How can you make a training experience truly great?
So my favorite answer for this is fun. So I'll go deeper than just leave you guys with fun, but I think fun can take a few different forms. So first, it can just be engaging. You can bring, if it's a live training, let's just say, you can bring more of an energy. You can engage with people. Yep. I remember there's a great podcast called Manager Tools that I used to listen to back in the day. Okay. And one of the, if you haven't, for those of you listening, if you care about business, go check this out. It's so good. I love it. And it's really practical guidance. But anyway, one of the things that I remember from that is when you're doing an interview, if you're like an interviewee, then you almost can't be too enthusiastic, especially virtual. And a lot of our trainings are virtual these days, not all of them, but whether it's in person or virtual, you almost can't be too enthusiastic. There probably could be some examples, but it'd be hard to find. It'd be more easy to find the alternative. Super boring. Like, I can't even do it because I like being enthusiastic. And that's the first piece. Just be engaging from an enthusiastic perspective, make it fun, be real, be human. We kind of mentioned that at the top. Show your vulnerability a little bit, connect with people in a real way. I talk about Harry Potter and I have people like messaging me like, oh yeah, did you see the blah, 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 or whatever. Just like some random comment just to make it fun and not make it super buttoned up. So I think fun is an underplayed like super weapon of like making things engaging and kind of making them stick and having it really take it to the next level. The other piece of fun is giving people something that they can actually learn in real time and start to see the light, if you will, of like, oh, I get this. I remember when I took my first design thinking training, there was a specific exercise called evaluation matrix, which is kind of complicated and we could maybe talk about that at a separate time. But basically we did that live and like it clicked for me. And it was like this magical experience that I'll never forget because I learned it in real, I got the teaching piece. And then we connected it with the doing piece, and that connected that transformation live in at least a small way. And now it takes time to really become better at it, but you get to start to see and really understand like, oh, this is what they're talking about. Versus a lot of trainings are just, Jacob, do this, blah, 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 blah. And you're just like talking for hours instead of having people do it. So to tighten that up, teach and then quickly let people do some aspect of it. And then you can teach again, you can kind of bounce back and forth, but give people an opportunity to actually apply what they're learning live. And side note, it also raises some really good questions for you as a trainer. And you'll start to learn what things you can incorporate back in to make it even better experience because certain things will come up every time. So anyway, there's a few things.
I think we could do a series of episodes just on what makes a good training. I'm thinking back to stuff you're saying and stuff I had to learn the hard way as a trainer. The having fun piece I think is so important. Like, I remember my first live training I did, it was during COVID, it was virtual, like for my corporate job. And I basically took someone else's session that they did a very good job on and was like, okay, that was rated very good. I'm going to do that same thing, copy paste. And it was just robotic and it wasn't fun. And it looked like I had just tried to copy and paste their session. And the feedback I got was that it was robotic and boring and all this other stuff. And I'm like, but the last one was so good.
What happened?
And I was nervous to bring myself into it. I think I'm like, well, I could do this example, but that's very me and no one else cares. And it was a sports example, right? I'm like, I had this like idea to put on my coach's hat. And so I brought some, it's funny, you went to UF. I lived in Gainesville. I'm a Georgia guy though.
That's all right. We share a cocktail party.
That's right. In
World's biggest cocktail
Jacksonville.
party.
That's right.
There you go.
So I brought some visors that like Kirby wears. And I basically did this thing at the end about, okay, like after we've learned this, let's now apply it. Let's put on our coach's hat and talk about Jimmys and Joes and X's and O's and give this people about people and systems and why they're both important, this whole thing. And then the feedback I got was that was incredible. And it became a running joke of, well, Jacob's got to do his thing at the end of this training session with his, his coach's hat, the Jimmys and Joes thing. And it was great. It made it fun for me. And in return, I think it made it fun for the audience, right? So I think like that can be a thing too, is making it fun for you as the trainer, because going back to the point about authenticity, when people see you're having fun, like it kind of gives them permission to have fun too.
Yes.
And to play and to be involved. Something else that came up too as you were talking, preparation. Because I think, let's say it's required training, right? Maybe it's a retraining on a subject. People walk in and they're like, I know this. Like, how important is preparation? I guess at any point, but especially with those kind of audiences.
Okay. So first I can definitely connect with the people already know it. For example, I had to take, this is just like a video, but I had to take trainings on how not to slip in the ice. I live in Milwaukee and I'm like, yes, I understand. I understand the lawyers want you to tell me this. And that one, I don't know if there's any saving that one, frankly, but besides that one, I think preparation plays. So maybe, can you ask me that again? So how does preparation play a role in training tell me again?
Let me set it up this way. I think people can see through you, right? So whether you're dealing with an audience that knows nothing on the subject, I think they can see if you know nothing on the subject. And I'm the worst audience person. I've gotten better since I was on the other side, but I'm immediately sniffing out if you know what you're talking about. And the second I sniff out that you don't know what you're talking about, I am turning off. I'm just like, nope, they don't know enough to be here. Maybe I'm the worst for that. But I just think preparation is something I want to do as a trainer is so important. Like, can you talk about how important preparation is from what you've seen in your experience?
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Thanks. So yeah, a few things there. One, I agree with you, especially, I'll just use a brief analogy. So when my wife and I got married, we were looking for photographers. I'm into photography. I'm not like the super great photographer, but I'm like, I will not hire a photographer whose pictures I feel like I could take better myself.
Yep.
So I need a photographer who's totally better than that. So I think people approach it the same way. Now, I will say some people come at different levels. So maybe there's people who know nothing about photography. So someone who's a more beginner photographer, just use this analogy still. That's totally fine. It works for people, similar to training. But I agree. So to bring it back to preparation, I think that if you are not prepared in the fact that you don't know your material, like if you're just reading off of slides, let's put it this way. If you're just reading off of slides and that's how you're delivering a training, that's going to fall flat, I think, every time. Nobody's going to care. Everybody's going to be bored out of their mind. You're going to be bored out of your mind. You're going to be nervous because what if somebody asks me a question?
Yep.
And it's not on the slide. I'm hosed. Like I can't answer it because I don't know. Right. So in that case, I guess just as an aside, don't do that, please. I guess there might be some cases where you have to, or there's some situation where like whatever, you had a co-lead or a co-trainer and they got sick and you do your best and you make it through and then you get better.
Right. Yeah.
But generally I would definitely pair with someone who is not in that. So if you're learning, that's a good way to level up and that's a good way to prepare. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what comes to mind.
No, it does. I'm like, I have a short story. So I'm training at the Chick-fil-A corporate office to a group of like, these are restaurant leaders. So experts on waffle fries, things that everyone has learned how to make. And I always start my session off with like, okay, everyone hold up on one hand. Like, how comfortable do you feel 1 to 5, confident that I'm an expert in this area? And usually when you get 2 to 4, it's like, okay, sweet. Everyone's going to learn something. And I had a group that just like 9 out of 10 were 5s. And I was like, okay, scrap whatever we were about to do. Like, my goal is that everyone here learns one thing today. Like, that you learned one thing that you didn't know before. And now everyone's listening, being like, ooh, like, he's not going to catch me. Like, I'm the expert. And I'm like, okay. Like, so I think my preparation, and I know this like the back of my hand. Now I have an experienced audience. I'm like, okay, this is compliant. You have to be here. It's a subject you think you know a lot about. Let's have fun and try to learn. Like, can you catch me teaching you one new thing? And I thought that just came back to, if I wasn't prepared, I couldn't have done that. And guess what? Every single person in that session learned at least one thing that I'm like, ooh, I'll get them on this one.
Yeah. Can I jump on that real quick? So the thing that came to my mind with that is, and especially, you don't even have to know any of the subject matter. you might need to know a little bit. But in that case, even a relatively new person, if they have facilitation skills, can, and again, it depends if this is a training that has like certain requirements you need to meet, maybe that's a little different, but you can still have a really good learning environment by facilitating learning amongst that group, almost as I'm learning and I know some of the objectives we need to meet, and we're going to do this as a group. And this is going to be a little different. We're throwing the playbook away. Since you guys know so much, let's talk about what problems have you had with waffle fries or whatever. Find a good prompt to start the conversation, and then you can still get something really good out of it, even if you're not an expert. And to go back to preparation, it really helps to know your stuff so that you don't have to worry about memorizing like words. You can just know your content, and then you can roll with the punches as they come in.
And then you can show up naturally. You know, you can be yourself. You can have more fun, which is going to make it more engaged. It all works.
Yes. Let me underline that really quick. It's hard to have fun when you're focused on what's on the next slide. What am I going to say? You're focused on survive. It's like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs again. You're focused on surviving, not thriving or whatever.
Getting through this.
Maslow, but yes. That's
huge. I want to go back to kind of in the vein of preparation, design thinking. And I know you use capital D designers. And I know Agile we talked a little bit about, but you have an exercise called the Rose Thorn Bud. What is that? Can you explain it to me? I'm in the dark on this too, so I'd love to know what that is and explain how it works.
Yeah, so Rose Thorn Bud is like probably the quintessential like design thinking method, exercise, again, whatever you want to call it. It's simply, and it's really simple, and that the simplicity is in what gives it its flexibility and usefulness. So all it is you have 3 different color sticky notes. Traditionally in design thinking, we use red or more of a pink for rose, which in corporate settings can be a little bit disconcerting for people because usually red is bad. But in this case, red, rose would be positives.
Okay.
The blues, kind of think about like your veins look blue, even though, side note, they're not actually, it's not blue inside you either. That's a whole thing. But your veins look blue or whatever. And I think that for thorn, like you get pricked by a thorn, and that's a negative. So I'm just kind of connecting all the dots here. And then green would be bud. So let me just package that really nicely. So you have rose, thorn, bud. Roses are positives. Thorns are negatives, and buds are ideas. And usually we color those red, blue, and green. And so you have those 3 different colors, and you ask people to, for example, give feedback on an idea, let's just say. So let's say somebody has, we'll just use like a really simple example. This is more designery, I guess, but you have it, or let's do training. Actually, we'll connect this with training. At the end of a training, or even pro tip, between, if you have multiple day training before your last training, so maybe at the end of the first day, you do a brief rose thorn. You can leave bud out, and you ask everybody to write down 1 rose, 1 thorn from the training that day. And then you make space to share it just briefly. Just people share it. You don't have to expand on it. You just talk really briefly. You put it up on a shared space, and that brings people together. It does a few things. It brings people together. It helps people reflect. It helps show people that some people have similar thoughts. Some people are on different wavelengths.
Yeah.
Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. It gives you as a trainer an opportunity to make some changes before the next day.
Huge.
It's so great. And so that's just one example. You can use it for lots of other things, but it's basically categorizing information, and that helps people think differently in terms of giving feedback. If you say, Jacob, give me some feedback on this podcast appearance, versus, hey, Jacob, can you give me some positives and some negatives and maybe some ideas I could do better next time? That'll probably give better, a little bit more deeper insight for me as the person asking for it, et cetera. So
that's huge. Something I talk about a lot is feedback is a gift. And this is an opportunity to, and you highlighted one huge benefit, which is if you're leading training, compliant or not, like you get immediate feedback on, can I make this better for tomorrow? Or if it's a full day thing, even like, hey, before we move forward the second half today, we're taking a break. Like, is there one thing that's gone well, one thing that's not gone well? I think that's huge as far as like an easy way to improve. And 2, I think you're giving them a voice where they're like, ooh, I can actually talk. I can make this better. And you're teaching them within your organization that feedback is a gift, and feedback is something you take seriously.
Yes.
And that even you as a leader can take, if it's a negative comment, and be like, okay, let's fix it. Like, let's do better by it, and lead by example in the area of feedback, especially if that's something you want within the culture of your organization.
Yeah. And then and I know I talk a lot, so thanks for indulging me. But I just wanted to share this too. I remember the first time I did this in a live setting was I started during the pandemic too with my my training career, if you will.
Yep.
And so most of it was virtual. And then eventually we got to go to, I'm not a huge sports or like golf guy, but there's a big golf, Pinehurst.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my company had a golf segment of our company, which is a whole nother topic. We're heavy industrial, but we make golf grips also.
Yeah.
And they're kind of sort of like their own thing. But anyway, they're like on the golf course. They have like a building at the golf course. And so we went there for a design thinking training. Anyway, this is just backdrop. But we did this. This was the first one in person that we'd done since the pandemic started, if I recall correctly. We did a bunch of work because it's a whole different mode. The training had evolved a lot in the last few years since we'd started doing trainings. So we did a lot of that prep work that you're mentioning. We're making sure we have like the plan ready and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember I was starting to tear up when people were putting their roses on the board. I'm like starting to get emotional right now. And I don't even fully remember. I don't remember any of the details were. I just remember feeling so grateful of like, wow, like I was worried about these things. They never happened. People love this training. It's connecting with them. I'm seeing how it's making a difference in their lives. Yeah. People are excited about it. It was just such a good feeling. Now, maybe you don't necessarily get a lot of good feedback depending on how the state of your training. So I can't promise that for everybody, but most likely people are going to give you good stuff, even if they give you some bad stuff, and it's going to feel really good, even if you have bad stuff alongside of it. So I strongly recommend doing that.
That's huge. That is cool. I did like reading. Everybody likes getting pats on the back, right?
Yes.
Like it's just, it feels good. So maybe a business owner's listening and they're like, okay, we've talked a lot about training, but to be honest with you, although I'm a business owner, I have a team of over 100, like at least, maybe it's even larger. But to be honest with you, like I hate getting up in front of people and talking. It's like when it's my time to lead the team, I hate it. That's not where I'm good. I'm good at a lot of other things, good at making money, but that presenting in front of a group is intimidating. You've mentioned a mindset shift that can help those jitters and help have better energy. What is it and how can people apply it?
Okay, I got two answers to this, but the first one is, and I think the person I was coaching, I said it a little more colorfully than this, but give a darn. And it was even more comfortable than the easy side, the easy replacement for darn. But anyway, it's you clearly, my conversation with them was, she was asking me about a bunch of like details, and that's good. Details are fine. How do I do this? How do I do that? And that's all good. And at some point I said, she expressed like, she's just nervous. She's not sure if this will go right. And I said, look, you clearly really care about this. Yeah. This wasn't a training. This was an experience that she was delivering, like an event. But I said, you clearly care. And guess what? That's going to show through in you showing up, caring for the people, and they're going to see you as a human. I think we talked about that earlier. They're going to connect with you as a person. And if you're worried about making mistakes, don't be, because actually those mistakes, you want some mistakes. If you are a perfect robot, basically, then you're not going to be able to connect with your audience as much. And then people are going to start to, they're not going to engage as much. They're going to disengage. And so don't worry about your mistakes and just the fact of caring. So anyway, to take it back to a really simple answer, I'm getting diverging a little bit in my response here. The answer that helped her, and she told me this is why I mentioned it, is just telling me that because I care, it'll all work out and it'll be fine, even if I make mistakes, just took the weight off her back to tell her basically, and she wasn't thinking about, I need to be perfect, but that's effectively what I would call it. If she wanted to be perfect, she said, I could take that weight off my back and say, I have prepared enough. I'm going to be fine. I care, and people are not going to care if I make a mistake. In fact, it's going to make me a better, more magnetic presenter. So that's what I would say to that. I have one other thing to share, unless you want to jump in.
No, go ahead.
So the second thing is, I think sometimes we also ask sort of the wrong question. I think I brought this theme up before, and I heard this also on a parenting podcast. Dr. Becky, who's great, as another podcast for parents out there, just recommendation. But she was mentioning, it was around holiday travel. And it's like, people are writing in like, how do I get through travel on airplane without fights or something with my kids? And she's like, maybe you're asking the wrong question. Maybe that question is impossible. So maybe this leader will never feel comfortable in front of an audience. In fact, I've heard from a lot of famous people who they still get nervous going up on stage or whatever, right? So it may never go away. So the question you might want to ask instead is, how do I feel confident delivering this material? Or how do I minimize my nervousness delivering this material? Or maybe just going deeper and saying, what am I afraid of that's going to happen? And then kind of playing some of those scenarios out. What would you do? Then you have a little bit of a plan, and then that can make you feel a little more calm. You still may be nervous, but that can help. And then the last thing I'll say, which doesn't necessarily help and doesn't necessarily fix it all, but ultimately practice helps a lot too. The more reps you have, the more you lean in and try things, the more you realize I can do this. So those are maybe more than you asked for, but there's a bunch of ideas there on that question.
No, it's great. I think the practice is important too. And I know it's hard to practice in front of a crowd because you probably don't get to just like rehearse in front of the big group. But I think even rehearsing it to yourself, I think it goes back to the confidence of, I know what I'm going to say. And so like, I'm not having to worry about, oh no, what was my next line? Like, what's the next subject? You know, when you're taking that off the list, you can then worry about the crowd portion of it. But you have the material to fall back on as your backbone.
Yeah. Understanding versus memorization or something like that. That could be a headline there.
That's great. So We've talked about a lot of different training stuff. If there's a business owner listening who could take away one thing that's just like, you know what, it's a lot of training stuff. We have a long way to go, but what's one thing I can do to create impactful training in the next week or month? What would it be?
Yeah, so I'm just going to harken back to our fun conversation. So I think that especially in corporate, and I'm assuming a lot of people listening are probably in corporate or some kind of structured business, not just doing something themselves. But I think there's not enough fun in the workplace. I think fun is seen as this frivolous thing that, okay, now that we've done that fun icebreaker, now we can get to business and now it's time to be serious.
Yep.
I think people are more productive and better employees, and your work output is better, and your shareholders are benefited, and your customers are benefited, and all these things when you're having more fun. So I think when you're having fun, you're doing better work. So find a way to have more fun, and it can be as simple as asking people what do they think would be fun for this next training? How can we make it more fun? So you can just ask your people what they want, and that can be a way to help give them more of that. So that's what I would say. Try to keep it fun.
I love it. Stuart Cathy, he was the founder of Chick-fil-A. He said, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. And there's pictures of him with a hula hoop in like most Chick-fil-A restaurants, like him hula hooping with that quote on it, which I always love.
Really?
Jake, where can people find out more about you and connect with you and your business?
Yeah, so you can just go to my website, intentioncraft.com, and that's where I have some information on my services. I have a newsletter you can find right there, but intentioncraft.com.
Love it. And I'll have that linked in the episode description. Thank you so much, Jake, for being on this episode. Thank you so much, audience, for listening and watching this episode of the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Take care.
Thanks.